Did you know that some people have a vitamin D deficiency despite having normal vitamin D levels in their blood? In this video I'll explain why and what role your genes play in this. Vitamin D deficiency is a common problem. It promotes the development of breast cancer, other types of cancer and osteoporosis. To ensure adequate supply, one can optimize their diet, take dietary supplements or be exposed to sunlight, because when the sun's UV rays hit our skin, it can produce its own vitamin D. To monitor vitamin D status, one can test the vitamin D content in blood. If the value is within a normal range, the person is considered optimally supplied. At least that was the assumption until recently. In reality, it's not quite that simple. Let's take a look inside a cell. Inside the cell nucleus, we find the human genes, and especially the VDR gene, which is the focus of this video. Every person has two copies of this gene, one inherited from the father and one from the mother. This gene has an important function for us. It helps the cells recognize vitamin D. The VDR gene contains the blueprint for a grasping arm that the cell can produce and transport to the cell surface according to these instructions. This grasping arm is called the vitamin D receptor and has a special function due to its structure. It has the exact shape that allows vitamin D floating around in the blood to dock onto it. When this happens, the grasping arm sends a signal to the cell with more or less the information: we have enough vitamin D, do something healthy with it. This activates central processes in the cell, and the vitamin D has its desired effect. Thus, the deficiency is easy to understand. Without vitamin D, it does not dock onto the grasping arm, and there's no signal and no healthy processes are activated. And now comes the problem with the genes. In some people, the VDR gene is defective. It still contains the blueprint for the grasping arm, and the cell can still produce this arm. But due to the gene defect, it is malformed. It can still recognize and dock onto vitamin D to some extent, but much worse than the normal grasping arm. The healthy signal to the cell is still there, but it's much weaker than it should be. The consequence, vitamin D loses part of its healthy effect. However, studies have found something interesting. If the cell is exposed to a significantly larger amount of vitamin D, the vitamin can dock onto the malformed receptors again and send a weak signal to the cell. But since more vitamin D is present, almost all of these receptors are activated simultaneously, and together they manage to inform the cell and trigger the desired processes. The defective receptors are indeed weaker, but we activate significantly more of them with a higher dose of vitamin D, thus achieving the desired healthy effects for the cell. This also explains why a normal vitamin D level is completely sufficient for people with optimal genes, but it can still lead to a deficiency in people with genetic defects. And how common are defects in the VDR gene? As with most genes, we have two of them. One comes from our father and one from our mother. Approximately 52% of people have inherited two functional VDR genes this way, and vitamin D is effective at normal levels. About 37% of people have one normal and one defective VDR gene, and the remaining 11% have two defective VDR genes and suffer from a deficiency of the important nutrient, even with normal vitamin D levels in the blood. In summary, it is important to understand that a blood test for vitamin D only measures whether one has a normal amount in the blood. To find out if there's a deficiency despite normal levels, one must take a closer look at the genes.